Assalamu alaikum, everyone. On behalf of CIOGC, I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's Quran Tafsir session. My name is Asra Ali. I will be your host for tonight. Locally, I'm a proud active member of the Mecca Center community here in Chicago and also a board member of ISNA at the national level. With the current state we find ourselves in, with not being able to go to the masjid, not being able to celebrate and worship together in Ramadan with our family and friends. I know I've missed that a lot, and I'm sure many of you have as well. It's nice to, alhamdulillah, have these virtual resources, such as this series, which have really helped to fill a void and give us a sense of community, give us a sense of comfort and coming together. So I wanted to thank CIOGC for doing this, as well as the co-hosts, Downtown Islamic Center and Dr. Muzaffar Mirza. Tonight, we have with us Ustada Tahera Ahmad. Tahera is the Muslim chaplain at Northwestern University, and I have to give a shout out to Northwestern, go Wildcats, because I am a proud Northwestern grad. And when you became Tahera, the chaplain there, I was so proud to know that the Muslim college experience would be so further enriched with that. Tahera is as I said, the chaplain at Northwestern. She studied at Hartford Seminary under Dr. Ingrid Madsen. She's also studied and traveled extensively throughout the world, furthering her knowledge. She's, mashallah, well known for her Quranic recitation and has ranked internationally in qiraat competitions, I believe 6th place. She's a proud member of the MCC community, and I know that and the MCC camps are a big part of your life. With that, I'd like to introduce you to get started for tonight. You will be hopefully doing tafsir for Surah An-Naba to Surah Al-Infitar.
Jazakallahu khairan, Asra. Barakallah feek. Bismillahi wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Ramadan Kareem, everyone. I know that we are fast approaching in the last few nights, actually, in the last 10 nights very soon. I want to thank CIOGC for giving me this opportunity as a Muslim woman and as a Muslim female scholar, an aspiring scholar, to be able to share some of my thoughts and the things that I have really acquired over time in terms of the learning of tafsir from several of our both male and female scholars that I've studied with. So tonight, I want to be able to talk to you about tafsir in a manner that even if you have, heard these surahs before, I want to give you a take on it in a way that perhaps you've never had. So I have a PowerPoint presentation for you because I think it'll be good to have some visuals as we talk about these surahs. The first thing I want to point out is that when we think about Ramadan, most people, when we think about Ramadan, or many Muslims, Gallup and Pew Research suggests that when we think about Ramadan, and even now our non-Muslim brothers and sisters, right, they think about Ramadan and they think fasting. Well, actually, fasting doesn't really even become a command until much later in Revelation. The beginning of Revelation is very much about the kinds of things that the pre-Islamic Arabian society was really challenged by. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as many ulama in tafsir of our historical tafsir say, that he would retreat to a cave. And you all know this, right? And I have this image up here for you. This idea that he would retreat to a cave, some ulama say for 10 days, for 30 days, for 40 days. And the question that we ask is, why was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam retreating to this cave? Some scholars, and including someone who is well known, Dr. Karen Armstrong, in her text says that part of the reason why the Prophet ﷺ was retreating to this cave is because his own family, the Qurayshi tribe, was in charge of an exploitative socioeconomic system where all these different tribes would come, as you know, and pay homage to the Kaaba and there were many different idols there. And so if you wanted a son, for example, because you never wanted a daughter, you would pay up a little bit of an offering and to these idols, and that would trickle back up to whom? The Qurayshi tribes. So the Prophet's own family was benefiting from this idea of people going to the Kaaba and then worshiping these idols. And the Prophet also saw that his society was going through a lot of different turmoils. People were going to war with each other for very minuscule things. Now, Rasulullah, as you know, is in this cave, and the Quran is revealed to him. And, all of you already know, most of you know the story, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the story. But what's important for us to know is that the beginning of revelation for Rasulullah, as many of you know from the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, she says that he used to have these true dreams, very, very true dreams. And then like whatever he would dream would actually come through and he would see it during the day. The other thing about the beginning of revelation is that when the Rasulullah revealed these surahs, many of them in the Meccan period have a very distinct quality to them. The surahs we're going to be talking about tonight, from An-Naba to Infitar, I want you to keep in mind that these are all Meccan surahs. These are being revealed in the time and state where the Prophet ﷺ is receiving revelation about specific injunctions. And some of you probably already know what the qualities of Meccan surahs are like. So, for example, we know that the Quran was revealed over 23 years, right? And we also know that about 13 years were revealed in Mecca. The Quran, at least 13 years of revelation was in Mecca Sharif, and then the last 10 were in Medina. Now, what are some of those qualities of Meccan surahs, the ones that we're going to actually be talking about tonight? Some of you probably already know, and I know that I can't see you all right now. I like to usually be more interactive with my audiences, but these are, again, some of the qualities or what we know. One is Tawheed, for example, right? That the Quran continued to talk about the idea of oneness of God. Now I have a question for you all. Was Allah Ta'ala constantly reminding the pre-Islamic Arabian, society that there is only one God, there's only one God, there's only one God, because they didn't believe in one God? Well, actually, they did have this concept of one higher power. They had like Allah and Uzza and many other, the smaller gods or their demigods, so to speak. They did believe in one higher power. But why then does the Quran continue in these Meccan surahs to remind the society about Tawheed and oneness of God? Well, because they were using the smaller gods, right, to exploit this idea of this Tawheed, of the oneness of God. And not only were they just putting up the idols, it was actually, they were benefiting socioeconomically from it. And so when the Quran comes down with this idea of the oneness of God, it's not just that the, pre-Islamic, Arabian society was like, oh, well, we don't want to believe in one God. It was actually because money talks. And this was a direct, questioning and challenge to their status quo of how they made their money. And I think that's what we have to remember about these surahs, is that the Meccan surahs challenge the exploitation of the socioeconomic system of that time. And so Tawheed wasn't just words of, okay, just believe in one God. Tawheed meant you need to take this very seriously. This is a matter between a person and their relationship with a higher power, and that cannot be exploited. Another aspect is the final days. While the pre-Islamic Arabian society believed in this idea of a higher power, they didn't actually believe in this idea of final days or a judgment day. That's actually quite unique, right? That's something that was introduced by the Quran to them. And that's what also was very challenging. And some of the surahs, as we're going to look at a little bit more closely in this presentation, you're going to see that the idea of a judgment or an afterlife was something that they were like, what do you mean we're going to be questioned for this? You mean we're actually going to be raised back again? We're going to be resurrected again? So another aspect, like I said, is resurrection. They didn't believe that there's actually going to be a day where they are going to be raised back up. An afterlife. And finally, social justice. You're going to see some very clear indications and injunctions on the way in which the society was treating the slavery was very prevalent, the way in which women were treated. There was female infanticide, and you're going to see that in some of these surahs. So what I want to, again, highlight is that when we're talking about these surahs, remember that these are surahs from the Meccan period. And when you see that little F on the screen, that's for fasting. Fasting actually is not an injunction. Fasting is actually not an injunction until, some ulama say, until the second period of Hijri, which means like Battle of Badr. And actually we are in those days right now, as some of you know, right? That the first injunction and the first command of fasting doesn't actually start at the beginning of the revelation with Iqra. It actually starts much later. And that's what's important to remember, is that 13 years of revelation, and I'm only talking about 5 surahs, but 13 years of this revelation is very much about building the capacity of the Muslim ummah of that time to really think about things like social justice. Think about what does it mean to have a relationship with the divine. And so the surahs we're going to look at focus on those areas that I just talked about. So another thing to keep in mind as we're talking about these surahs, I was asked to talk about surahs number 78 through 82, right? Surah An-Naba to Infitar. Now that is the actual number in the Quran. But what I want you to keep in mind as we talk about the tafsir of these surahs is that Surah Takwir, for example, which is technically the 81st surah, right? In terms of the numbering when you open the Quran, it's actually one of the earlier surahs to be revealed. So I want you to keep in mind that even though the surahs tonight we're talking about are collected at the end of the Quran because of the subject matter of those verses, the way in which these surahs were actually revealed, I've actually numbered it down for you. And again, there's always going to be a slight difference of opinion amongst the ulama of, well, was it the 7th or the 6th? Or, you know, for example, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh has a different opinion on Surah An-Naba, between Surah An-Naba and Surah Nazi'at, like which one was revealed first or second, but they're pretty much around that same time. Abasa is actually not revealed towards the end of the Meccan period. It's actually revealed a little bit earlier in the Meccan period. So I've actually made this slide for you so you can kind of see it, you know, and it's clearer for you. So for example, Takwir, as you can see, I put it as the 7th, it's towards the beginning. Then you have Abasa. And then the last 3, as you can see on the slide here, the 80, the 81st, and the 82nd are towards the end. And what's really cool, as a cool fact, as if you want to know, is that Infitar and I believe Surah Sa'd, which is surah number 38, those 2 surahs are actually, the revelation order and the number order is exactly the same. So Sa'd is the 38th chapter to be revealed, and it's also 38th in number. And Infitar is also the 82nd, and it's also the 82nd to be revealed. That's kind of a cool fact for you to know if you didn't know that. Now, let's go ahead. I wanted to give you that basic idea in those, you know, in the framework of how we want to talk about these surahs, is that you have to remember that they were spread out, and the first 2 are closer to the beginning of Revelation, and then the last 3, of Meccan period, and the last 3 are a little bit, you know, later. And one more thing I want to say to you is, going back to the slide, if you're wondering, some ulama say about 86 of the 114 surahs were all revealed in the Meccan period. So I want you to think from the perspective of the last 3 surahs that we're talking about are actually revealed before the Hijrah, like pretty much right before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is moving into, of course, Medina Sharif with the Hijrah. Now let's get into the actual surahs. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of detail. I mean, these surahs have an incredible, I mean, I remember in my madrasa days, we spent maybe just on one surah, like literally months, right? What I've done for you is I've highlighted some things that you can take with you. And the next time you read these surahs, you think a little bit, you know, about them, right? Inshallah. So the first one, Takwir, like I said, 7 to be revealed, right? It has 29 verses. What is Surah Takwir talking to us about? It's actually talking about the end of times, like I said. I want to highlight a little bit of the balagha in Surah Takwir. And balagha is what? Like Arabic, literally in Arabic poetry, but it's also like the nuances, right, in the Arabic language, which are absolutely fascinating. And then the most important, I would say, as a Muslimah, when I read these verses, is that it directly asks about or challenges the status quo of female infanticide in the pre-Islamic Arabian society. And of course, female infanticide is still, you know, prevalent today in the world, not just in Muslim countries, but in many, many different countries around the world. So why is Surah Takwir such a powerful surah? I just shared with you that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the Quran is revealed, it's revealed in a time when the pre-Islamic Arabian society is really struggling with a lot of different social justice issues. So for example, in this surah, right, you have the first word that you see is idha. Now, I don't have a lot of time to go into the details of what this means, like in terms of balagha, so I've bulleted it out for you, right? Idha is often used for something that is actually a future tense, right? When you say id, you're actually, when the Quran says id, it's actually about the past, like remember when, right? But idha is actually for the future. And if you notice, kuwirat is in the Arabic tense of past tense, right? Kawwara yukawwiru, and it's kuwirat. But when you add idha to it, it actually means the future. An example of this is a surah you all probably have memorized, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ, right? إِذَا and then ja'a, right? Ja'a is actually in past tense, but we talk about it in the future tense because of the way the language is here. The other thing is, these are the last few surahs. If you hear them, you'll hear idha. You'll hear idha, right? Idha many times. And actually, in balagha, it's actually called, we have a special word for this. And so I've actually put it up here. It's called, like itnab. It's a type of way to get someone to pay attention more, right? It creates an eagerness, or we say like mushawwiq, right? It's something that draws people in, like, oh, what's going to happen next? So you keep hearing the idha over and over again in this surah. So that's actually something I wanted to highlight for you. Now, takwir, right? Some ulama say that it actually comes from, like, when you take like a long cloth and like you want to tie a turban around someone, right? And the sun here, إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ, right? It's this idea that the sun is being slowly unfolded and then completely unwrapped. There's difference of opinions. Like, I actually was looking up the fasir on the surah. So many opinions on what does that actually mean? Does it mean that the sun actually snaps the other way and it comes out, right? We had this idea, does it come from the west? Or does it mean that the light of the sun starts to diminish, right? Some ulama say that that's what it means. But finally, let's go to the green part of this verse, right? وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. When the female, baby that's being buried alive, it's going to ask you, for what sin is it being buried alive, right? This is the highlight I want to share with you. This surah, remember, is point blank, like challenging the practice of burying daughters alive. And it's not only, saying, well, you can't just do this anymore. It's saying, guess what? You are going to be held accountable. So even if you think that you're going to get away with it in this life, well, guess what? You're going to be raised on a day and you're going to be questioned for it. So stop doing this, right? So it's a very powerful surah that literally, again, is at the very beginning. And I want to remind us all that Sumayya radiallahu anha, the first martyr of our tradition, listens to this surah, and particularly these verses. And the narration says she remembers that her father was going to bury her alive, and he doesn't, because his heart couldn't do it anymore. And when she hears these verses, right, from her son Ammar radiallahu anh, and both Yasir alayhi salam and Sumayya radiallahu anha, they actually convert, and then they become the first martyr. So this is a very powerful verse, especially for the sisters who are listening, that our, I would say our mother Sumayya radiallahu anha, she heard these verses and she knew that she's going to stand up for this tradition, because it was standing up for women at a time when literally they were being buried alive. All right, let's go to our next surah, Abasa, right? Some of you know this surah as the surah that actually, challenges something Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had done. And I actually think it's beautiful because Allah Ta'ala is in such a beautiful way, right, reminding Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam of the qualities of continuing to be what he already was, is a great leader. So Abasa, around the 24th, some ulama say, between 23rd, 24th, 25th surahs to be revealed, 42 verses. And what is this? It's the incident of the blind man, right? There was a sahabi, and we're going to see this on our next slide. He came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then you have a little bit of the Arabic balagha in here, and then I want to talk a little bit about the mannerism of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what's going on here? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is speaking to at least we know Abu Jahl was around, and we know that one of the, like, literally the most difficult people to deal with, Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, was also around. And the Prophet ﷺ, you have to remember, like I said, it's at the beginning, right, of his prophethood, so to speak, right? And so the surah, when it's revealed, we know that Abdullah ibn Maktoum radiallahu anhu was a cousin of Khadija radiallahu anha. So think of it this way: he's family, he's part of family, right? And the Prophet is talking, and Abdullah ibn Maktoum he's not he's lying. He can't tell what's actually like happening in that sense, right? So one hadith says that he actually approaches Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he says, he actually says, Ya Muhammad, right? He doesn't even say Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like Ya Muhammad, allimni bima allamak rabbuk, right? Like teach me what your Lord has taught you. And he says it several times. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's beautiful. I actually looked up the different ways in Arabic language of how the Quran describes emotion on the face. So for example, abasa, first of all, it's in third person. Allah Ta'ala, look at how beautiful this is. Allah Ta'ala, when he's talking about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he doesn't say that, directly, oh Prophet, you did this. It's actually saying this was done, like he frowned. It's like, someone wants to say something that you've done, but they don't want to tell you to your face. Like they're just generally speaking like, oh, so-and-so frowned, right? So there's a frowning, and it's the kind of frowning where literally you just see like a few wrinkles on somebody's head, right? And then there's different kinds of frowning, and you can see this on the screen for the sake of time. There's a teeth type of grinding in the Quran. There's, face bulging and teeth grinding in the Quran. But this was the point I'm trying to make for you or to you is that this was the simplest kind of frowning, right? Like a person can have on their face. And so what is Allah Ta'ala reminding Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? That, the leadership of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is so significant to the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and their maqam. Look at this. Allah Ta'ala is elevating the maqam of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and reminding Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, to have that sense of humility. Another reminder is, some ulama say that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was reminded right from the beginning that this message is not just about like the quantity, but it's about the quality, right? Like the person who does this tazakka, right? The person who continues to purify themselves, that's actually better than, the multitude of people who may be accepting the religion. And then finally, it relieves Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I believe, right? Because Allah Ta'ala says, like, look, وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ, like you don't know, right? Whether the la'alla is like, it's like a term that's used often for like maybe, like you don't know if this person was going to or not going to, right? But the Prophet is constantly trying, and it highlights that this is what he did, right? He continued his best to try to mobilize and to give the message. And Allah Ta'ala is continuing to remind us that actually what's more important is to continue to do tazkiyat an-nafs, to purify ourselves. All right, let's go to our next surah. So let's talk about Naba, right? So Naba, as I shared, is towards the latter part of the Meccan period. It has 40 verses. And something I want to share about the way I think Naba, the way I look at it, is that I believe it's organized in about 7 parts. Some say, if you can look at it in 5 parts, but I think it's around 7 different ways to look at the surah. And the highlights are, it talks again about the Day of Judgment. And what's really interesting also is that it connects to Surah Nazi'at with the story of Musa alayhi salam. So that's also, it's important to remember. So I have a lot on this screen. I'll just share a couple of things. And again, I know this is being recorded, so you can often, go back and think about it in more detail. But the 7 parts, important to remember is that the way I've highlighted is that parts 1, 3, 5, and 7, they're all about the day of resurrection, right? They're about the idea of being lifted back up after you have passed away. And what's beautiful to me about the way the surah starts is Allah Ta'ala says, عَمَّ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ. What is that? It's anma, right? It's literally the word in Arabic is anma, like what, like the questioning of what are they asking you about? But it's a rhetorical questioning, right? Because the people that it's talking to actually did not believe in this idea. So, but subhanallah, you know, by the end of the surah, those same people are like, oh shoot, like I wish I had, you know, really taken this seriously. So the way the surah is organized is the beginning is like, hey, here's the shout out to the skeptic, so to speak, right? Like, here's the way in which people are questioning whether it's actually going to even happen, right? This day of judgment. And then towards the end of the surah, you have like Allah Ta'ala reminding us that those same people are going to be like, well, I guess this is our reality, right? The middle part though of the surah is what's you really actually quite beautiful. Is it really asks the believer to think about all of the beautiful creation of Allah Ta'ala, like to look around, to look at the mountains, to look at, you know, everything that's happening around us, and to really contemplate on that. And all of that is continuing to remind us of who is in control, Allah Ta'ala. And that if you think that all of this is not going to at some point be back into a place where Allah Ta'ala will hold us accountable again, well, to think again, so to speak. So it's a rhetorical, beautiful surah that forces us to kind of like really think. And then let's go to Nazi'at, which we are, I know we're coming to our time, so I wanted to make sure we have some questions as well. So An-Nazi'at, which is also a very, very beautiful surah. It's the 81st or so to be revealed. Like I said, there's a difference of opinion. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh believe that it was revealed before, that before Naba. Again, you're going to see some of these differences of opinions. 46 verses, and again, it connects to Surah Naba, and again, Day of Judgment. And then what's really interesting I wanted to highlight about this surah is that you see aqsam in this surah, right? Like oaths being taken. So for example, the oath for that you see, you know, Allah Ta'ala taking sometimes by the stars, right? And in this case, the wow, right? It's the wow here is the wow that we say for taking an oath. Now, some ulama say that, well, Allah Ta'ala only took oaths of things that were like really, you know, grand, like, you know, the stars and the skies and you know, the sun or the qamar, right? Or the moon. And other ulama say, well, you know, it's not just Allah Ta'ala taking an oath by something that's grand, right? It's sometimes by what is the subject matter related to for the rest of this surah. So in this case, it's really about this idea, right? وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا, that the souls are going to be pulled out, and there's again a difference of agreement. I'm actually going to go to the next slide so you can see that. Some scholars believe that this is referring to the angels that are going to be pulling the souls, and the, you know, like the idea of these angels that are coming up upon you with these horses, right? Like, but it's this fast pace that's coming towards you, and it's literally diving into you and ripping the souls out. It's kind of a I know it's a very hefty surah. And some other scholars, you know, say, like Hassan al-Basri rahimahullah was of the opinion that it's literally, you know, like the stars of the sky are being pulled apart. So it's not actually angels coming and plucking, so to speak, the soul out near, you know, the end of time, but it's actually the stars in the sky that are being completely dispersed. And then some again refer to it as wind, right? Like it could be rih, right? It could be a rih that literally takes away from the time. Let's go back really quickly to this the slide of the verses again. Important way to look at this surah, I would say, is that verses 1 through 9 are very much, again, a reminder about Judgment Day. And then the Quran, again, addresses the skeptics of the Judgment Day over and over again in these surahs. I think you can see that that's part of the theme. And if you're thinking, well, why, right? Why are these surahs continuously about the Judgment Day? I shared with you in the beginning that this is a time period where pre-Islamic Arabian society did not believe that they're going to be raised up again. And you have to think from the perspective of, like, if you're doing something and you're accustomed to it, and the society in which you're living in is really, I mean, we're talking about the way in which, you know, female infanticide is no joke, right? Like you're bearing an actual literal being alive, right? And so the verses are like coming down over and over and over again about the Day of Judgment, about reminding them that, guess what? If you think you're going to get away with it now, there is a judgment day. And then what's beautiful about these verses over and over again is you can see there's a similar theme to them, right? These last three verses, or surahs at least. The idea that if you're going to be a skeptic, Allah Ta'ala like challenges that, right? And that's what's so beautiful in the balagha of these verses, is you're constantly challenging the skeptics and then bringing them back, right, to reality, so to speak. Last surah, Surah Infitar. You know, I actually love, you know, even for my own recitation, I love reciting the surah. It's just beautiful. They're all beautiful. It's the 82nd, like I said, to be revealed, both chronologically as well as in the Quran order, or Quranic order. It's a shorter surah, 19 verses. It connects very much to Surah An-Naba and the themes of Surah An-Naba. And then, of course, again, Day of Judgment, you're going to see that as the main highlight. And then also you're going to see some oaths in here as well. So if you remember, I shared with you that Ida, I've repeated that for you a little bit, that it's this idea of repetition, and it's part of the balagha of the Quran. And it's, you know, it's this idea of creating an eagerness for the listener to say, okay, like, let's see what happens next. But I want to focus on Infatara, right? What's really unique to me, and if there's something that you can take back about these, you know, these last three surahs or so, is that Infatara, right? Like, it looked it up in Lisan al-Arab as well as like, what do some of the scholars say about what is Infatara? Infatara is actually a verb. You know, when you translate it in Arabic, it often shows up in the translation Quran as like something that is like pulled apart or splits apart or cut apart. Infatara is actually when you take something like and cut it right down horizontally, right? Like just go right down, right? And the other thing I want to highlight to you is it's on the pattern infa'ala bil Arabi, right? So an infa'ala is actually, you don't know who the doer is, right? And then Allah Ta'ala reveals, right? Like, hey, I'm in control, like I'm here, right? So fatara, remember, it's to cut horizontally. Why am I making this point to you, right? Because the other verbs after idha, right? Shaqqat, for example, right? Or other verbs that talk about the splitting of something. These surahs, subhanAllah, are so mind-blowing, like literally, because إِذَا السَّمَاءُ انْفَطَرَتْ is like this way. And then shaqqat is like, psh, right? And it kind of explodes. Then you have fujirat, right? It's like coming out of the ground. Allah Ta'ala uses literally all different kinds of verbs to describe what that day is going to be like, right? Or what that time, if not day, so to speak, right? What that time is going to be like, from the top to the, like, every direction dimensionally that you can think of. That's what's really interesting about these last few chapters of the Quran that talk about the Day of Judgment. The verbs that are used, subhanAllah, right, to talk about that time. Some are like, it's going to happen this way, it's going to happen this way, it's going to be engulfing out of the ground, it's like literally all the different kinds of verbs. So I wanted to highlight that for you to remember. Again, like I shared with you, the Quran is revealed over 23 years. And what I want you to remember is that we talked a lot about the Meccan Surahs, right? We talked about from Surah An-Naba to Infitar. But what I want us to also think about is that Medinan verses are very much about ritual life and personal and civic law, right? And then also to engage in self-defense. And in Ramadan, the Muslimin were actually in a state of war. They were in a state of battle. Whenever I think about fasting and how hard it is, I start to think that, you know what, subhanAllah, the Muslimin, when they first started fasting in the heat and the desert of Arabia, were actually also in a state of war. So the Meccan surahs, right, as you know, Surah Baqarah is one of them. And again, there's some slight difference of opinion, which we don't have time to get into, of like some of the ayats being revealed in Medina as well. In Mecca as well as Medina. But this is the verse, as you all know, in Surah Baqarah, right? يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون, right? So why do we fast? Do we fast to fear Allah Ta'ala? And I think fear I would say, is not the right way to translate taqwa. You know, taqwa is a deep sense of conscientiousness of the divine, of Allah Ta'ala. And so the idea that the surahs in Mecca are very much about really thinking about your actions, really thinking about, if you believe in this higher power, then what about the social justice element? What about how you treat other people, right? That's what the taqwa was supposed to do. So when the Muslims came into Medina, by the time they came from Mecca to Medina, they were actually physically and spiritually ready to begin fasting in a way that it's not just something visceral. It's deep. It's embedded within them. They're able to really know that if I do something wrong, I'm gonna be questioned for it. And it wasn't just verbatim. It was part of the way their overall outlook of life was. So Quran, I would say, is very much right about the revolution and revival of the Muslim community. Both, of course, in the Meccan period, it's very much about a revival of the soul. And then in the Medinan period, it's very much a revolution, right? It's fighting for what you believe in. And of course, establishing what is, what they believe to be the best way to continue to live out. I have a last slide here for us to or last two slides here to think about ibadah in Ramadan, or worship. Is again, how do we do this? I think it's continuing to seek forgiveness from Allah Ta'ala. Many of the surahs that I talked about continue to remind us of that. Caring for humanity, I think that's a huge theme in these surahs. And my last, suggestion is, I know that when we think about Ramadan, we think about fasting, but really Quran, right? Like Quran is a very important aspect of Ramadan for us. And I know that it could be a little bit overwhelming because it's 6,236 verses and many of us are on different levels of recitation. But the Prophet ﷺ said that the person who struggles the most actually receives the most reward as well. So if there's, an app that you like or something that you can start to kind of really revisit your relationship with the Quran in these last 10 days, I would highly recommend it. If you are at a beginner level, intermediate, or even advanced, there are so many opportunities now for us to re-engage with the Quran. I hope that the way in which I talked a little bit about these surahs kind of made sense to you in terms of the trajectory of the revelation of the Quran. And I want to leave you with the dua that Aisha radiallahu anha taught us for the last 10 days of Ramadan to continue to recite, Allahumma innaka afuwan tuhibbul afwa fa'fu ya kareem. Or that's another version of it, Allahumma innaka afuwan kareem tuhibbul afwa fa'fu ya kareem. So this is a beautiful dua that I want to make sure that I share with you all, that it's something tangible for us to take away in these last 10 nights. Jazakallah khair. I know I'm slightly over, so I'm going to stop there. I pray that inshallah the presentation was helpful to you. If you have any questions, I know we have a few minutes. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you so much, Tahera. Really, I really gained a lot with your, especially your PowerPoint presentations. And sorry you had to speed through it because there was so much there. You mentioned that the Quran is a revival and revolution for the community, but I think also on a personal level. And I wanted to ask you, I know many people are finding themselves with this extra time during this pandemic. And alhamdulillah, they've been taking the time to delve deeper into the Quran, especially in Ramadan. What resources would you recommend to someone? I know you just mentioned using different apps that you're used to, but for someone who is a novice and wants to delve deeper into tafsir, what would you recommend?
Okay, well, specifically for tafsir, I think the study of Quran is a good start. I think that that's actually a pretty good, text that kind of is well organized and can help, I think, anyone who's primarily speaking in English, of course. And so I think that actually is something simple. You can start looking at the tafsir from that perspective. It's titled The Study of Quran. Another, I think, opportunity that and again, I know that, we're all we have this screen sharing right now, and some people are completely zoomed out, so to speak. But there are several, good, I would say, good lectures of tafsir online as well that I think are important and could be helpful.
Along those lines, I know you ended with a dua that's very close to my heart, because every day at iftar, my father used to read that dua.
Oh,
And so it's very special. So I thank you for reminding us all of that. And may Allah, grant forgiveness for all of us and forgiveness for everyone who has passed on, inshallah. Um, what are some other ways that are recommended in the Quran for seeking forgiveness and refuge, especially in these last 10 days?
subhanallah, one of the reminders, even for myself, is that the etiquette, as we know, of making dua, and thank you again, Asra, for sharing that that was something your father did. May Allah, Allah yarhamhu, may Allah ta'ala bless him. Such a great, great person, mashallah, and someone who contributed greatly to our community. May Allah ta'ala bless him and all the Muslimin, ya Rab. So the etiquette of doing dua, as many of you may know, is we start with salawat on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we do this why? Because when you want somebody to make dua for you, right? You do it because you think their dua, inshallah, will be accepted. Well, every time that we send salawat on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know from Sahih Hadith that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam responds to it, and an angel actually brings that back to us, except on Yawm al-Jum'ah. Rasulullah said, Yawm al-Jum'ah, I respond myself. And again, there's difference of opinion of what that actually means. But what's important is to start with salawat, because what you are directly receiving the salam of Rasulullah when you do that. It's fascinating. So we start with salawat, and then we do istighfar. And we do this because, like you mentioned, Asra, it's something that comes from the Quran. Allah Ta'ala says, فَقُلْ تَسْتَغْفِرُوا إِنَّهُ كَانَ غَفَّارًا, right? And then there's blessings. Allah Ta'ala says in Surah Nuh that when you do istighfar, it immediately, right, there's the blessings of Allah Ta'ala will be inshallah granted to you. And it's tied many times, blessings and receiving blessings are tied to doing istighfar. Now, from a mental health perspective, as somebody who is a chaplain, I would say that when we do forgiveness, it's not about, this idea that, oh my gosh, I'm sitting in confession and I'm like, okay, God, I'm sorry for this, I'm sorry for this, I'm sorry for this. No, it's actually allowing the self to ground, right? To be grounded and to remind themselves that we need to think about how we present ourselves to a higher power who we believe has all power, right, over everything. And that when we commit to a sense of humility and that we allow for Allah Ta'ala to take over, right, in that sense, and to say, I recognize that these are some of my own weaknesses, Ya Rab, and help me through it and guide me through it, right? It's a very grounding kind of both exercise, but also, of course, a prayer that we do. So what's recommended, again, is to say salawat before you do your du'as, and of course at the end of them, and then doing istighfar. And doing istighfar, not because you're like, okay, great, I just have to sit there and confess to God of my sins. No, Islam doesn't have that concept. Islam has this idea of taslim, right? This having submission, having a sense of deep humility, and grounding yourself and recognizing that, okay, here's where I know that I need to grow, my Lord, right? Here are the ways that I have done things that are not beneficial to my own soul. And you are the only one who can guide me, and you're the only one who can help me. So help me, my Lord, right?
Thank you. And, as you are a chaplain, I'm sure there's a lot of students out there. You had mentioned there's students who are far away from home and everything. And the Quran is always, hopefully, a source of comfort for people, especially if they find themselves alone during this time. Any thoughts on that? Have people reached out to you? Have you given any advice on certain verses to read?
That's an excellent question. Thank you, Asra. I have found that, and this is actually all across, there's so much research now being done on the idea of how different religions use meditative practices to help, ground themselves, and even allow for, breathing through, right, and mindfulness. So many of the students across the country right now who are away, especially the ones who are international students or graduate students who, subhanAllah, they're all very close, and all of our students are close and dear to our hearts. And of course, I'm going to give a shout out to my Northwestern students. Allahu Akbar. Yeah, okay, good. Alhamdulillah. I know some of you are listening, mashallah. I saw you in the chat right there. Alhamdulillah. The Quran is, I think, such a beautiful gift to us because it allows us to take a breather, right? And the way it's supposed to be recited is through those pauses, right? And we breathe through those pauses. There is actually a neuroscientist who came to Northwestern not too long ago and talked about how different religions have, this idea of recitation and how that can release, like serotonin, dopamine, like basically allows the body to heal itself, or sometimes, raise it, kind of the emotional capacity as well. Many of the students I know that we do a daily 5 p.m. every single day for 30 minutes, a Zoom call, which alhamdulillah is a beautiful opportunity. And, I invite all of you and any of you to join us. It's the opportunity of reciting even one verse together. And so having a community where we can meditate and ponder and to do tadabbur, right? Tadabbur al-Quran has been a great, I think, relief for so many of our students. Alhamdulillah.
Tahera, for all of that. I know we've all benefited. And thank you so much to CIOGC and the co-hosts, Downtown Islamic Center, Dr. Mirza, and Amana Mutual Funds. Truly, this has really helped all of us feel a sense of community. Please do remember CIOGC in your donations, especially during this most unusual time we're finding ourselves, and inshallah gain that extra reward by donating during Ramadan. CIOGC has definitely been working diligently during the pandemic crisis to really bring the community together through virtual programs such as this. So please don't forget them, be generous, and be generous with your du'as, especially as you open your fast tonight in just a few minutes. Remember the community, remember all of us, and may Allah accept all of our du'as, accept our ibadah, and hopefully we'll see you all soon again tomorrow night. Tomorrow night will be Dr. Musammal Siddiqui, and he'll be addressing the tafsir of Surah Mutaffifin to Surah Baqarah. On that note, I close off from my end. Thank you so much. And again, please remember me and the whole community, the ummah, in your du'as tonight. Assalamu alaikum.